a lot of pastors have a tough time with that, and understandably.
Yeah.
So the biggest decision, up front is whether or not to exempt. And if you do it, it's usually financial suicide, because 95% of pastors will never make enough to save enough to have a retirement.
Okay, we just wrapped up chapter 2, the Four Horsemen of the Pastoral Apocalypse. Really good chapter. Tell us about the 4 unique treatments that you took us through that chapter.
Well, Ashton, I really think the title is actually better than the chapter. It's such a cool title. And I had the 4 unique treatments, and everybody thinks that these unique treatments in the tax code are this blessing to all these pastors, when it actually, it's pretty much a curse. It just dawned on me. It's like the apocalypse, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, the 4 unique tax treatments. I thought it was cool.
What makes for a great chapter.
Yeah, I thought it was cool.
We enjoyed reading it.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. So anyways, the 4 treatments. Number 1 treatment that's afforded in the code for pastors, well, I'll read them all off. You can be exempt from Social Security. You can have a housing allowance. Pastors don't pay Social Security tax. They pay self-employment tax. And churches don't withhold taxes from a pastor's wages unless they elect to. So we'll start with the first one, exempting from Social Security. A lot of pastors, especially when I was growing up and things like that, they're probably told to exempt out. And they just did, because they, trust in God. God will provide.
I was told that.
Yeah, but you didn't.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, you did. Oh my God, we're gonna have to look at your tax. No. Anyways, bottom line is a lot of people were just told that. But the reality is, the requirements, the main one is that you have to answer a question that says you're religiously opposed to receiving government support based on your ministerial income. Well, you tell that to me, they all go, huh? Where'd that come from? Yeah. Most of the decisions weren't intentionally done illegally, but they're a lie. So that being said, if you're exempt or not, half the people want to get back in the system, and whether there's a time to opt in or not again, which I think there might be in the next couple of years, but there's ways to get back in the Social Security on exterior income and, outside income and things like that. But again, it's not always a blessing to be exempt. In the beginning, like at your age with kids, you get a bigger earned income credit if you're exempt from Social Security. You save $7,000, $8,000 a year in Social Security taxes, but you have no retirement. And there's no way on your salary or somebody in your position's salary that you're going to be able to save enough to be able to have a comfortable retirement. If you save 10% of your salary for 40 years and make 5%, you'll almost equal or might equal what you would get in Social Security. So, I did a model just roughly, and if you contribute to a 403B, the pastor's version of retirement, and the church does 5% each, after 30, 35 years or whatever, you have like $750,000. Yeah. You can take $48,000 a year out of that over 25 years if you retire at 67 or something, so into your 90s, and pretty much tax-free. But that will equal about what you'd get in Social Security, because if you and your wife have normal jobs, blah, 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 you're probably going to get about $45,000 a year. Yeah. Well, why not have both? Pay into Social Security. If you can't afford it, maybe you're in the wrong calling. Maybe the spouse has to get a job. Maybe you have to live lower. Don't get the house, rent, live in a trailer, live with your parents, whatever you have to do. But be realistic about your financial situation, but by doing what you have to do first. And it's the 10%. 10% to God, 10% into your retirement. Pay your taxes and live on the rest. And if you do that, you'll always have what you need. Well, I can't afford to do that as a pastor, blah, blah, blah. Well, then get another job or get another career. But be honest with yourself. And a lot of pastors have a tough time with that, understandably. Yeah. So the biggest decision up front is whether or not to exempt. And if you do it, it's usually financial suicide, because 95% of pastors will never make enough to save enough to have a retirement. Yeah. Yeah. 2, the biggest one, housing allowance. Okay. Again, for the pastors that are in the 22% tax bracket and above and all that, the housing allowance gives them a tax advantage because the lowest tax brackets are 12.
Yeah.
And you're paying 15.3% Social Security tax, given you're in the Social Security system. And most of this book is about pastors that are in the Social Security system.
Okay.
That's where it really helps you because you can reduce that tax while you're growing your income. So with the housing allowance, when you're in the 12% tax bracket, i.e. you and your spouse make $100,000 minus your standard deduction, you're taxed at 12%. Well, the housing allowance is 15.3. So, you're paying on that instead of paying on, the income tax. Now, if you were an employer working for somebody else, they would withdraw half of that and all that. So the reality is that's not what this whole section is. It's learn how the housing allowance should be structured based on your specific situation. All of these things, parts of your salary package, whether you exempt out of Social Security, all that, are really individually specific, and people treat it like it's carte blanche, just an automatic thing. People believe that taking a housing allowance, the largest one you can do, is the best thing. Well, sometimes it's the stupidest thing. And I'll take for granted the $50,000. You don't have any taxable income. Well, what happens if you have another job and you're putting $22,000 or $20,000 or whatever into a 401k? Why not switch it over and put it in your 403b as a pastor? Now that brings your income from $50,000 down to $30,000. And you don't have any housing allowance or any self-employment tax or anything on that amount.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it's covered by the standard deduction. So you went from having $7,065 in self-employment tax to $4,500 just by contributing to your 403b, switching it and not costing you a dime. You switch it from your job through your secular employer to the ministry 403b account. Yeah. So you got to take a lot, and it's always individually specific. You got to look at it on an individual basis.
How does this apply to my situation, my scenario?
Exactly. And then the next things, which I don't think most people, when they ask me what I'm doing and why I'm coming down here, I said, I wrote a book and I'm doing. Oh, they all think it's a big thing to write a book. Yeah. Most people buy their own books to get, so don't even worry about that. It's nothing. But the other two things sort of go hand in hand. Pastors don't pay Social Security tax. They pay self-employment tax. And we talked about a little bit about that in the history. That was a way for them to pay into the retirement system and get Social Security when they retire. And churches don't withhold taxes from pastors' paychecks. They can elect to, but they can never take out Social Security and Medicare tax. Pastors have to pay both halves themselves. Well, obviously from a planning perspective, that leaves the pastor in a really horrible position. He's on his own. They're going to, you go to a call committee, you get hired, we're going to give you X amount of money. First thing out of the treasurer's mouth of the church board is, how do you want us to structure it? How much do you want your housing allowance to be? The pastor's on his own, unless you're in a mega church that has, multiple staff members doing that, and then they probably still do it wrong because they don't do it on an individual basis usually. But in this case, there's no withholding coming out. You don't know whether you're supposed to do estimated tax payments. You don't know how much your withholding should be. A W-4 for most pastors is a worthless form. Most churches will hand it out, and that's where you set whether you're married 0, single 0, and all that, and you have taxes taken out. Well, if you're in the Social Security system, you're going to be 15% short. You're going to get killed at tax time if you fill out a W-4 and think that takes care of your withholding and tax requirements. So what's a pastor to do? He's on his own. He's going to get killed. A pastor that makes $50,000 a year, a single pastor that makes $50,000 a year and doesn't do any withholding because he thinks it's tax-free with a housing, blah, blah, he's going to owe $10,000 in taxes. How does anybody make up from that hole? You start out owing $10,000 in taxes and you're single at 50, well, there goes the wedding plans, oops, that house just sailed by. So this fact that they're paying into the Social Security system is good, so they can have a retirement. But the fact that there's nobody there to help them and say how much withholding, how should we do this, how do I set my estimates? That's where we come in, because half of it is expectations. If you have false expectations and you get the surprise at the end of the year with taxes, it's devastating. But if you know what to expect, you can plan for it. Now, you might not be able to do it all at once and all that, but you need to grow into it. And you need to, as you get a raise, increase your withholdings, blah, 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 start structuring it so you get refunds to make up on your past tax debt. But you really got to understand the fact that you really have to see what your tax liability is and then pay in the right amount. These are not blessings, these unique treatments. These are a curse to pastor because they don't know how to handle it. So the easiest way, if you've already gotten burned on your taxes, you filed it, you owed $5 or $10 grand, well, make sure it's done correctly first. Call us, go online, contact us, we'll review it for you if you'd like. But see what your tax liability was when you know that it's the correct tax liability.
Yeah. Divide
it by your pay periods.
Okay.
That's what your federal withholding needs to be, not what some W-4 or some administrator tells you it would be.
Yeah.
Now, some people actually have a formula worked out where they can say, okay, you're going to make this, and they have spreadsheets in some churches, bigger churches, and you can sort of trust them, and they'll add something in for Social Security. But remember, if your church gives you a little allowance for Social Security, they give you your half back, you got to add that into your taxable income. And then you're going to pay Social Security and Medicare tax on that and income tax. So you're losing 30% of that.
Wow. Yeah.
So beware.
Yeah. That's really good and really helpful information, I think, for a lot of guys to process all the variables the way you're helping us process it. It's really, really valuable. So if you want to find out how you could save thousands of dollars on your tax returns, go to taxscott.com and we'll see you in the next chapter.